Hi, my name is Justine, and this is my sewing journal. Today I'm sharing how I made this Prada dress that Gretchen Baretto wore. So today I'm sharing how I made this Prada dress that I've seen on a Filipino actress named Gretchen Baretto. For context, I am from the Philippines, although I am based in Newcastle, UK. So on my socials, I see a lot of Filipino content. One of the videos that I've seen a couple of weeks ago was this video from Dr.Aivee featuring Gretchen Baretto. Now, if you're Filipino, Gretchen doesn't need any introduction. But if you're not, well, she's basically one of the most beautiful actresses to grace Philippine cinema. I don't think she has made any recent movies, but she was one of those actresses that I grew up watching in the 90s and up to maybe early 2000. Anyway, on Dr. Ivy's video, she was wearing this apron dress that I thought looked really cute and sexy at the same time. While watching that short video, I thought the dress looks easy enough to recreate, said my delusional self. So I went on Google and tried to find where the dress is from.
Unsurprisingly, it's a designer dress and it's from Prada. So join me as I fulfill my ambition to copy Gretchen's designer dress. The first thing I did was to have a closer look at the design elements of this dress. I was glad the material of the dress is included in the title. And luckily, it's just cotton poplin, which is a relatively cheap fabric. The silhouette is fairly simple. It looks like it's just an apron, but with a full skirt. The main design detail of this dress is those layers of ruffles. If you look closely, the bodice has two sets of layers. The first set has three layers of ruffles, followed by a set of two layers of ruffles. While the skirt starts with three layers of ruffles, but instead of decreasing the number of layers, this time the layers increases by one. As far as I can tell from the pictures, the only fastening around the waist are those waist ties, while the bodice is secured in place by these two straps. I don't have a sewing pattern that I could hack to make this dress. I just used those reference pictures and made it up as I went along. So I ordered 2 meters of this white cotton poplin. Since the skirt will be the one that will take a lot of time to make, I decided to start with the skirt. The skirt is a midi length, so that's 29 inches from my waist to about mid calf. I found out later on that 29 inches is actually not enough. If you're going to make your own version of this dress, add 10 inches on top of whatever is the finished length of the dress. So if you want a 27-inch finished skirt, then you should cut a 37-inch fabric. Now for the width of the skirt, I took my waist measurement and multiplied it by 3.3. Then I divided that number by 2, but making one side slightly wider than the other. So with my measurements, I have one piece that's 43 inches and the other 50 inches wide. I think the side without the ruffles will need to be wider because you need it to be a bit more gathered than the side with the ruffles. If you don't want the skirt to be too puffy, you can reduce the multiplier to maybe just 2 or 2.5. I think my version turned out to be a little bit puffier than the original. So my two pieces of skirt are ready. So after preparing the two pieces of fabric as the base of the skirt, now I need to figure out how wide the ruffles are. I estimated 2.25 inch would be wide enough. Before I started sewing, I thought I better change the needle. Changing needles regularly helps with achieving a better finished garment. For the finished edge of the ruffles, I'll be sewing it twice. I fold it once and then sew it, and then trim the excess fabric and then fold it again and then sew it again. While on the other side of the strip, I will just be folding it once and then sewing it. I realized later that I actually don't need to do this last step since this unfinished edge won't show anyway. At this stage, I didn't know how to attach the ruffles to the skirt, so I thought I should at least fold this edge and make sure that I don't have a raw edge. So on the side that I only stitched once, I'm going to use the stitching as a gathering stitch. Gather the fabric by pulling on the thread. Just be gentle so that you don't actually break the thread. Also, try to move the gathers along so that you'll have evenly spaced gathers. After doing all that, I measured the ruffles just to see if I'm happy with the finished width. It was roughly an inch and a half, and I was happy with that, so I carried on making more. Anyway, I can't really say how many strips of ruffles I had to make. All I can say is that when you think you've made enough, you haven't. Next, I prepare the skirt by stitching two basting or gathering stitches. Then I gently pulled on the basting stitches to create the gathers. After that, I tried the skirt on to see how tight the gathers should be. After testing, I actually loosened the gathers again so I can add the ruffles onto the skirt. From the hem, I measured 4 inches. That's where I'll be sewing the first line of ruffles. Now I need to figure out how to actually attach the ruffles. My initial thought was to fold in the unfinished edge onto the skirt. That way, I'll be able to hide the unfinished edge, as well as the gathering stitches. After pinning the ruffles to the skirt, I thought this is the best time to actually check if I made enough ruffles. So back to the floor again to lay out all the ruffles. The Prada dress starts with 7 layers of ruffles from the hem. Going up to the waist, the number of ruffles reduces. Since I'm not 6 feet tall, I'm not starting with 7 layers of ruffles, but instead I'll start with 5 layers. So I'll be doing 5, 4, and then 3 layers near the waistline, which is the same number of layers as per the Prada dress. I will also be lessening the distance between the sets of ruffles. I am a foot shorter than the model, so I have to make these adjustments. I have massively underestimated how many ruffles I need to make, so it's back to making ruffles. After finally making enough ruffles, I started layering the ruffles onto the skirt. Here I've already layered some ruffles starting from the hem. I start by measuring 1.5 inches from the last layer of ruffles. Then I draw a line where I made the marks because I want to make sure that I will be stitching the ruffles in a straight line. Then using the guideline, I pinned the ruffles onto the skirt. Then I hand basted the ruffles onto the skirt. Instead of hand basting, you can obviously just stitch the ruffles straight onto the skirt, but I prefer hand basting because I can adjust the ruffles as I go along. Then I fold the fabric to cover the ruffles. This will hide the unfinished edges or the raw edges of the ruffles. I'm pressing the fabric to make sure that I'm actually catching the unfinished edge of the ruffles. I recommend pressing or ironing this folded edge to make sure that your line will be a straight line. I did not do that because I was impatient, as always, but I recommend it. I also recommend checking the tension of your machine before stitching the folded edge. Now that you're stitching 3 layers of fabric, it is a little bit bulky, so you might need to check your tension. At this stage, I realized I might be losing a lot of the length of the fabric because I'm folding it at every layer of the ruffles. I started with a 29-inch panel, but now I only have about 23 inches left. So I bought another meter of fabric since what I have left won't be enough to cover the difference. Here you can see how much the ruffled side of the skirt has gotten shorter. The challenge now is to make sure that when I add the extra panel, I'll be able to hide it within the ruffles. I did manage to do it quite neatly, but it took some time, so I'll just speed this up a bit. The point is, if you're making this, make sure to add extra 6 inches onto the panel that you'll be adding the ruffles. After what felt like 10,000 years, I'm finally finished with the ruffled side of the skirt. Now it's time to prepare the plain side. All that's needed for this side is to gather the skirt. Now it's time to sew together the ruffled skirt and the plain skirt. While I was stitching these two panels together, I was thinking about whether I should be adding an invisible zip. The Prada dress did not look like it had an invisible zip, so I decided not to install one. Instead, I made the waist a couple of inches wider than my actual waist so that I can just pull the dress over my head when I wear it. It took a couple of tries before I was happy with the wider waist measurement. I had to be careful with the extra inches that I'll be adding. The side of the skirt that has ruffles is a little heavy, so I'm not sure if the waist ties would be enough to keep it in place. I had to admit, while I was wearing this at this point, I had a vision of a Victorian child with a ruffled skirt and also of Little Bo Peep. Hopefully, people won't think of those two things when they see the final dress. It helps that the newer Bo Peep in Toy Story is not wearing an all white dress. Anyway, after making the skirt adjustments, I then hemmed it and prepared the waist ties. The waist ties are about 1.5 inch wide by 60 inches long. For the bodice, I prepared a trapezoid piece. The top is 11 inches while the bottom is 13 inches, while the length is 14 inches. The aim is to get a 10 inches by 10 inches bodice after adding all the ruffles. Similar to the skirt, I added the ruffles the same way. I first hand stitched it down, then folded the fabric over the ruffles, and then take it to the sewing machine. So, like the skirt, the bodice will be shortened after I've added all 5 layers of ruffles. For the bodice, there's only 2 sets of ruffles. Now, the tricky part of the bodice is determining how wide it should actually be. I would like to wear it the way Gretchen wore it, without an undershirt. However, I'm not sure how much side boobs will be on reveal with this type of bodice. I made several adjustments before I was happy with the final width. My mistake here was adding the lining before I was actually happy with the width. I did unpick the lining to adjust the width as well as add darts. I didn't think there was any darts around the bust area on the original dress, but my bodice was gaping too much at the sides, so I did insert a small one. When I was happy with the bodice fit, I then fixed the shoulder straps in place and closed the lining. I just hand stitched the lining in place because I didn't want another layer of stitching to show on the other side of the garment. Now I'm almost done. It's time to attach the bodice to the skirt. After attaching those 2 parts, I tried the dress one more time before I attached the waist ties. And here it is, my very own Prada dress.
This might end up just gathering dust on my dress form, but I'm still happy I've made it. I do feel a little bit smug managing to make a Prada dress for a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the cost. But I won't play the who wore it better game because we all know who won that. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Until next time, happy sewing. Bye!